Hello, thank you for watching. I am going to do kind of a dive into some material that I found from my dissertation, surprise, about the Columbian Repository of Sacred Music. It seemed to me I'm a little late for our Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, but I think it still tracks and wanted to share some things from my research. So in 1802, in Exeter, New Hampshire, Samuel Holyoke published a book called the Columbian Repository of Sacred Music. He's a tune book compiler, and he picked some songs from European composers and also picked some songs from American composers, meaning people who had come from Europe but were living in America, born in America, so they called themselves American, and so including himself. So he included himself as a composer in this. And this was happening at a time in history when there was a big pushback against what was called the old style of singing, and that had been happening for a time, but there's a lot of evidence from my research to suggest that the old style of singing had voices from different European traditions who were engaged with Native American voices, with indigenous folks, with perhaps enslaved blacks, but a commingling of different people singing together, sort of in a call and response style, learning psalms. And that old style, there was complaint against it, and much of what I've found suggests that perhaps that the presence of other singing styles that were not European in nature were problematic, or not sort of Christian in nature as well. So Holyoke publishes this book, and the language of Columbian Repository I just thought was interesting, and I found many other books that were labeled Columbia or Columbian. And so before I sing a tune and share some of his singing instructions, I'm going to read, just to frame this out a little bit, from a book called Riot and Revelry in Early America that I found, which has been fascinating. And chapter 9 deals with the 18th-century discovery of Columbus. So that was around 300 years, celebrating 300 years after Columbus, 1492, sailed the ocean blue. And that 300th anniversary was sort of a time when people resurrected that idea of Columbus and got very excited to make Columbus sort of maybe this unifying historic figure to justify and celebrate the expansion of the Republic across the territory that was the space of indigenous populations. So interesting just to consider that. I'm going to read a quote from that. He writes, as the American landscape was cleared of native people and classicized, it was Columbianized. The name Columbus thus marked conquest, but also represented that aggrandizement as legitimate and benevolent, like it was a great thing, and a peaceful and kind thing even. Western Columbias and Columbuses, whether new towns or countries or rivers, represented the triumph of an expanding American republic. So interesting, because what does that mean then to think about a songbook that is named Columbian? So thoughts about that. I am going to sing a tune from this book called Orleans, and this is written by Holyoke. I'm just going to sing part of it. I had kind of a laugh. There's a researcher, Richard Crawford, who says that Holyoke was sort of allying himself with these musical forces of reform, but he didn't have a particularly strong gift for writing melodies. So I'm just going to sing this part of a melody of his, and you can decide what you think of his melodic gifts. So it goes, high in the heavens eternal God, thy goodness in full glory shines. Thy truth shall break through decide what you think of the melody. I want to share some of the things that Holyoke wrote, instructions for singing. I have to pick them up off the floor because I dropped them on my paper, but I printed this out from the book. So one of the things that sort of deals with this old style of singing, I think, without saying it directly, is some of the language here. So he talks about harsh singing, and he says, especially when the whole strength of the voice is constantly employed, will seldom, if ever, produce any effect unless it be that of disgust. So he talks about loud and hard singing is usually accompanied with a distorted countenance, a convulsive motion, a vicious pronunciation, a harsh melody, and an unmeaning bawling, which cannot have the most distant claim to the idea of music. And he goes on to promote soft singing as an expression and flowing, beautiful thing. But basically saying that this other style of singing is not good and is not pleasant and can't even be described as music. And there's a lot of evidence this language of bawling is a word that is sort of picked up in this arguing against the old style of singing, and it is especially connected with Native American ways of using the voice. They were also called horrid and howling, and other words that were used to sort of create fear around ways of Native Americans and the way they use their voice. So there's that, which is just interesting to begin with. But some of the things some of the rules for singing that Holyoke includes are, let's see, avoid all affected gestures and discover no pain nor difficulty or distortion of the mouth or grimace of any kind. So no facial whatever. Never sing through the nose unless you wish to disgust all who hear you. Vocalize correctly. He writes, that is, give an open and clear sound to the vowels. So advocating for a very specific sound and style of singing. Interesting to consider that in the thoughts about Columbus and naming things and sort of conquest of the voice. Yes, interesting thoughts. So thank you so much for watching, for considering. Perhaps things that we take for granted can be interrogated, and we can get to the heart of perhaps where they came from and what they mean and who was intended to benefit from them. Peace. Thanks. Bye.